Absolutely. I'll ask everyone, if you can go on mute, just to eliminate any background noise. We welcome you coming off of mute to ask any questions. I'll monitor the chat session. So for questions you may have, or anything that you'd like to communicate while Bill is presenting, feel free to do so. And we'll leave time at the end for some Q&A. So we welcome your eminence. Thank you for joining us again. It's a real honor to have you here. I know this is in the third session. We had to do a quick shift, but have a tremendous turnout so far tonight. So welcome everyone.
Thank you. Let us pray. Almighty God, our help and refuge, fountain of wisdom and tower of strength, who knows that we can do nothing without your guidance and help. Assist us, we pray to you, and direct us to your divine wisdom and power, that at this time in the life of our parishes, of our church, and of our nation, we may accomplish our tasks and whatever we undertake to do, faithfully and diligently, according to your will, so that it may be profitable to us and to others, and to the glory of your holy name. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, now and forever and to the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.
Permit me to say a greeting, and then Steve, you can take over, and then Bill, you can do the same, if you don't mind. Is that the order of things that we do? Yes.
It'll be fine.
We changed it from yesterday to today. What a shame. We should have it last night. Having said that, tonight we're passing the midpoint in the 5-part series on creating a true culture of stewardship. And I have been inspired by the participation of so many people. And like all of you, I have admired the enthusiasm and commitment and never-ending zeal demonstrated by our friend and our leader for this evening, Mr. Bill Marianis. I know that this evening will be another session filled with practical, inspirational, applicable, and proven strategies for building up stewardship, the concept and the action, both sides. Covering topics tonight, what I think includes also welcoming, thanking, youth stewardship, and small groups. These are at the core of so many aspects of our parish life, indeed of our life in general, not only in the parishes, that enable us to grow in so many ways, to create an atmosphere and a culture of welcoming and of gratitude are the key elements that traverse so many aspects of our ministries, of our everyday life, or it should, with stewardship just catching up only the surface. I know that we are all looking forward to Bill's presentation, and I'm profoundly grateful for the extraordinary effort he has put forth to offer this program for our benefit. Ever thankful to him. Steve and Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Eminence. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. Bill, I know we've got a full set of content, so let's dive in. I know also, Bill, we appreciate with the shift in schedule, just came off of another Zoom. So thank you, Bill, for going back to back on these long Zooms. And again, please feel free to post any questions in the chat session, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end of Bill's presentation. So Bill.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. Thank you very much, Steve and Kristen. And thank you to all the rest of you for participating and coming back again and making the shift. As His Eminence said yesterday, there was a negotiation between us and the Presidential Debate Commission as to who was going to move the date. They requested that we move, and so we graciously accommodated it. And then after the debate yesterday, we got calls today saying they're sorry. They wish they would have sent everybody to our program instead. That's actually not what happened, but that's probably what should have happened. I'm going to begin this program, as I've done every other program, by reminding you of the most critical and important question that we must ask ourselves as individuals, as Christians, and as faithful within the church. Why are we here? Why is our parish here? What is the fundamental purpose for which we exist, for which our Lord has given us all of the gifts and talents and abilities? And we're reminded of that, of course, in the 2 Corinthians 5:10, their prayer that's in the middle of the Divine Liturgy, which focuses again on the account that we will have before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. And that whatever we can do, we ought to be working towards that. And I remind you of the question that I think is the most challenging question I know how to ask, as to that our Lord could ask of each of us, and that is, what have we done with His church under our watch, given all the gifts, talents, resources, skills, abilities, and experiences that we have available to us? And so it is in that concept that we're trying to flesh out these 15 very discrete and important and critical aspects, which have been determined scientifically and empirically to lead to the greatest culture of stewardship within a church. As we've mentioned before, all of these are available to you, of course, on the Metropolis website. They're also available on my website, which is stewardshipcalling.com. And if you look under the stewardship tab, you'll see you have your very own page. And on that very own page, every one of these PowerPoints is loaded. And Kristen, who does a great job of the editing, when the video is completed, we load the video there also. So you can get the video and you can get the PowerPoints from either of those two sources, either the Metropolis website or the Stewardship Calling website, and they'll be up there. One of the questions that I frequently get, having done this now for a while, is, hey, does this stuff really work? I mean, is the stuff that you're talking about, do you have any evidence that it works? I mean, I know you've given us all the empirical background, but do we have any real evidence? And one of the blessings that I receive is, several times a week, I'll get an email or a text message or a call from a parish or a priest or a layperson that I worked with sometime over the last 13 to 14 years, telling me how they implemented something and then sharing with me some success. And so I thought I would begin this time with two things that came in just this week. The first one is from Philemon at a parish in St. Gregory the Theologian in Mansfield, Massachusetts. And I had done this program here, I'd done a live program in the Metropolis of Boston at last year. And Phil was one of the people that was kind enough to be present there. And he sends me an email. I just wanted to share this with you because I thought it was relevant to what we're facing today. I won't read the whole thing, but he said, Bill, I was deeply inspired by the talk. And as the president of the PCA, I immediately convened a meeting of the leaders of our parish to share what I had learned. We implemented a stewardship program for 2020 centered around parish ministries. And listen to this, setting a goal of 100% engagement of our stewards in our ministries by the date of our parish's 30th anniversary in 2022. We also set a goal to meet, and I love this part, 100% of our operational budget through stewardship alone. We're currently at about 70%. We introduced the idea of proportional giving and implemented the Roundup campaign. Remember that from the last one, where we ask everybody to round up to the next highest whole number of percentage of giving and keep adding 1% a year until you get to 10%. But listen to what he says. They implemented the Roundup campaign, of which about 25% of our stewards opted into. So right away, with a good campaign and effective communications and getting them to round up, they already got a quarter of their stewards to round up to the next highest whole number of giving. That also led to, and then here's what he goes on, we eliminated our coffee hour donation basket and drastically reduced our budget for candles and trays with the aim of eliminating them altogether. As we encouraged our stewards to include these offerings in their stewardship giving, we determined to create a council of ministries and invited all ministry leads to our first couple of council of ministry meetings for the year. And you remember we talked about the council of ministries in the second session. Now, that was what they did starting November through February, from November of 2019 through February of 2020. And then we all know what happened with the COVID pandemic hitting and the church being closed down. Here's what he says next, because I think this is really telling. He says, as it turns out, these changes are probably the difference between our church being in the red or in the black due to the COVID-19 crisis. So thank you for the timely message and inspiration. The point of that is merely to say they only had begun to implement some of these 15 strategies that we've been talking about: the personal visitations, the roundup technique, moving to being a tithing parish, creating a council of ministries. And lo and behold, just within a short period of time, it moved the culture of the parish in a way sufficiently so that as they were faced with this unprecedented, horrible pandemic, they were able to keep themselves in the black even in face of all of this. And so that to me was just a very telling testimonial. None of this belongs to me. This is all God's greater glory. But what this tells us is that we can do this in every one of our parishes. And I just wanted to share you one more that came in today, yesterday actually. And we're going to it's going to lead into one of the topics we're going to talk today about: youth stewardship. You'll remember from one of the earlier sessions, I talked about the Good and Faithful Stewardship Challenge, the thing that I've been begging parishes to do now for about 8 or 9 years, where you give money to the parishioners and you challenge them to take that money, to put it out into the kingdom, to cause it to multiply, and to see what happens and how they feel about it, and see the lives that they change. And every place that I've seen this being done, or everybody that's tried to do this, including a Roman Catholic parish that I worked at, the Father Luke Veronis's parish in Webster, Mass, it has begun a massive transformation. Well, lo and behold, another one of the parishes that was there when we did this program, that embraced this program, and they looked at the materials that I had set up on the website, because I have a whole section on that, on how you can do this in your parish. This one is from St. Luke Greek Orthodox Church in East Longmeadow. They implemented it. They gave $50,000 to their parishioners. Every parishioner unit received $300, and they were challenged to put it out into the kingdom, practice the parable of the talents, and see what would happen in return. Now, there's a whole page of testimonials. I'm not going to read all of them. I just want to read to you a couple of the most critical ones, and one that's going to foreshadow the topic we're going to talk today. One of the topics we're going to talk today about youth stewardship, but also talking about welcoming and gratitude. So 4 very quick comments. Number 1, this, they're talking about the gift, renewed my faith in the church because of this act of kindness. The second one, first, let me congratulate you. Now, this is a testimonial that came back to the parish that did this, right? First, let me congratulate you for one of the nicest and most thoughtful gestures you've come up with. I've decided to give my check to a young woman who had to close her small shop and who's much need of help. I have tripled the sum so that she can pay her rent and stay another month with her family. I thank you for thinking of me of St. Luke's for its incredible gesture. God be with us. So there's an example of where that person caused that $300 to multiply by a factor of 3 and provided incredible generosity. Now, this next one is the one that's going to foreshadow a conversation we're going to have about youth stewardship. This came from an older couple in this parish. They said, and I quote, "We have 6 grandchildren, ages 5 through 9. We decided to give $50 to each child to pick a charity of their own to donate to. With their parents' help, one chose Horizons, a family service center. Another chose Hunger Resource Center of Northern Virginia Family Service. 2 chose the No Kid Hungry, and the last 2 chose First Book. We," this is the grandparents talking now, "also matched each donation for a total of $600. Their families were then inspired to donate also, with the kids also contributing for their piggy banks." So look at what's happened as the culture of stewardship, it causes these people to think about, how can I help this multiply and make a fundamental difference? And then the last one I'll share with you is the fourth person, and there's a whole bunch of them if you look at their testimonial page, that said, "We were able to match the gift to a young couple with small children." So again, we see a doubling of the gift. One of the parents was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer right after purchasing their first home. The other parent has always worked in the human welfare occupation, always helping others. This donation inspired to match or multiply. So the point of all of this is to say is that everything we talk about, every one of these 15 principles that we talk about, is validated by empirical research and science, but it's also validated by the real life experience of Orthodox churches and Orthodox faithful throughout our entire country. And so what I'm telling you is this works, and what I'm challenging you to do is to pick some of these and start to work on them. As His Eminence foreshadowed, we're going to talk about 4 things today: welcoming, thanking, youth stewardship, and small groups. At the beginning, I told you every one of these sessions is going to have at least one silver bullet in it. One of those things that is so powerful and so effective that if you do it, it can be really transformational for your parish. Well, I'm telling you, this session is going to have 2 of them. So let's dig into it. The 7th of the 15th elements of the culture of stewardship is to create a total welcoming experience. Not just a welcoming committee in the narthex, but a total welcoming experience. Now, here's some really comprehensive research that was done by the Pew Forum in 2016. They surveyed people that were looking for a new church. So this is across all Christian denominations. These were the things that they looked for that made the determination of which church they were going to pick for their new church. Now, this occurred either whether they were moving to a new area, whether they were looking for a new denomination or a new belief pattern, or they moved from one neighborhood to another neighborhood and they were just trying to figure out what church they were going to go to. Here are the top 5 things that people look for. Notice, I always have to focus that the number one thing that people look for is the quality of sermons, but we're not talking about that today. There's a separate program that I have on that. But the number 2 thing that people look for in determining whether or not they were going to pick their parish is, were they welcomed by the leaders? And Pew went in further detail as to what that means, so we're going to explore that. A welcoming ministry is completely orthodox in its fundamental theological underpinnings and its beginnings, and it sets the tone for the whole loving church experience. It's the second most important factor that people look for in picking and staying in a church, and it helps people make the decision that they pick the right place to worship and that they want to worship with you. They want to be there with you. Ultimately, it also makes people want to come back again, because let's face it, you've all experienced that thing when you felt welcome, when you felt appreciated, when you felt like you were part of a family. It made you want to reinvest your time in that. And therefore, it makes people begin to feel like family. The more we welcome and love and care for each other, the more we begin to feel like a family. And never was it more critical than it is right now as we're dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic, where everything the doctors and the epidemiologists are telling us runs 100% contrary to the fundamental precepts of welcoming and loving family communities. This is a real challenge, and this is a real opportunity for us. Finally, and I think this is really the key point that I wanted to make from a theological underpinning perspective. If we go back to what I think is one of the most important and most critical messages in the entire Bible, in John 13, 34, 35, when the Lord defines everything down to one commandment, that we love one another as He loved us. It is through this loving, welcoming experience that we can actually begin, not perfectly, but we can begin to emulate the kingdom of God in our parishes through a culture that's overflowing with joy, peace, and love. Now, greeting newcomers in the narthex is merely the first and frankly the easiest step. Every parish I go to, every diocese I work with, every metropolis I work with, every national church I work with, they say, oh yeah, we're doing good, we do good welcoming. Here's what's fascinating to me. I've now done SWOT analyses at, as I said, churches, dioceses, metropolises, and national churches, that if you counted all the Orthodox Christians that live in them, it would be over 26% of Orthodox Christians. In every parish, in every diocese, in every metropolis, in every national church, one of the highest, most frequently mentioned weaknesses is welcoming. And yet, at the same time, in almost every one of them, one of the strengths that they identify is welcoming. Now, how can something be simultaneously a strength and a weakness? And this has always been a point of confusion when I present the data that comes from their detailed SWOT analysis. Well, here's the answer. Normally, I would take this a little bit of time, use the Socratic method, ask a few questions to get you there. But in the interest of time, let me just give you the answer. We are very welcoming to our family and our friends. We are not as welcoming to the total stranger that walks into the church or the person that we don't know, right? So we think we're welcoming because we have that sense of collegiality and community with a small group of people with whom we have that sense. But the average person walking in from the outside doesn't always feel that. So we've got to transcend ourselves into thinking that the welcoming experience in the narthex is merely the first and easiest step. When you do that, it's not just about, hey, welcome, here you go, here's a bulletin, go on. You need to connect with that person. Now, I know this seems a little bit disrespectful because there's a divine liturgy going on, but you need to learn to have a little dialogue with them and get a little piece of information from them. Find out something about them. Are they traveling through? What's their circumstance? Did they move the community? Do they have spouses, families, kids, whatever? Now, when you're doing this interview, you're looking to see enough about them so that you can do what? So that you can ultimately connect them with somebody in the community that's like them, that can welcome them in the context. Here's another thing I want to challenge you to think about as part of your welcoming ministry. Have people that are available to sit with them and answer any questions they have, or depending on if your church is a church that continues to do it in the Greek language or whatnot, they can translate for them. When we were experiencing the 3-year memorial for my mother, my daughter invited her roommate to come to the memorial service. And I was a little perplexed because she was sitting 3 down from me and she was talking to her roommate constantly throughout the whole thing. And I was trying to wonder what is going on. And then it was only after I kind of leaned in and found out she was explaining every aspect of the liturgy and the service to her roommate. And her roommate was asking follow-up questions. And I realized, to the total stranger coming into an Orthodox church, and particularly if they come into one that is more ethnic, it is such a foreign experience, how wonderful it would be if there was somebody that could sit there and help guide them through the process. You've got to find someone to take them around and meet similar people at the coffee hour. This is the reason why you find out something about them, so that if you found out, well, they have 2 kids and they're like this and they do this business and da-da-da, you can now identify people in the community that are like them and introduce them and actually create a connectivity between them. And then you have to have somebody follow up with them personally. Now listen to this. This is very important. Within a week, to find a way to meet them again in person and get to know them better. And it doesn't matter whether it's coffee. Now, again, I know everything is a little bit impacted negatively with the COVID situation, but we want to follow up within a week. Let's show them how important they are to us, and we're going to follow up with them a week. And ultimately, we want to personally bring them to at least one other parish activity. Now, notice I didn't say bring them to another parish religious service. Maybe that's a little too early. Maybe you just want to engage them in another parish activity, a ministry activity, a Bible study, a book study, a small group gathering, whatever the case may be. Get them a little bit more comfortable unless they're ready to go in, because ultimately, what you want to do is engage them in a ministry. Of course, we want to ultimately, if they're already Orthodox, engage them in the liturgical practice, but they'll understand that. What they won't maybe understand is how important it is for us to engage them in a ministry. And if they're a potential convert to the church, imagine how powerful it would be if we can get them more comfortable in experiencing the whole totality of what it means to be Orthodox. Now, one of the questions I always like to ask everybody in one of these sessions was, when was the last time you invited any non-Orthodox friend, neighbor, work colleague, or person you met to join you in church on Sunday? And if we're being honest with ourselves, for most of us, the answer is never. Or maybe once I did one, I don't know. But we don't even think about that. And yet, the data, and now let me present to you hard data from Lifeway Research, 71% of Protestant or non-denominational churchgoers have invited an individual or a family member to attend a worship service with them within the last 6 months. And 1 in 4 of them have invited at least 3 individuals or families in the last 6 months. You know, in my law firm, when I was practicing, 2 of my partners, it's kind of interesting. One was raised Roman Catholic, and one was raised Episcopalian. They both left those denominations and went to big box non-denominational churches. Do you know that once a quarter they would invite me to some activity? It wasn't the services. Maybe it was a men's group or a Bible study or a service project or thing of that nature, right? Now, they knew where I fell on the Orthodox spectrum, but yet they are inculcated in a cultural way of inviting people in it. When you listen to the programs that the Archdiocese has done on outreach and evangelism, when you listen to the incredible work that Tomaida has done with the Ministry of Outreach and Evangelism within the Metropolis, what you'll find as a common element is that the culture of invitation and welcoming is created within that context. Now, if you want to use a humorous analogy of it, you know, given the fact that I always love these mob movies, as I've referred to before, you can just think of what Don Vito Corleone said, that you ultimately want to make them, you want to be their godfather. And he said, friendship is everything. It's more than talent. It's more than government. It's almost the equal of family. And indeed, in one parish, we actually ran a program where every newcomer that came into the community, once we figured out who they were most like, we created, and they could be Orthodox or non-Orthodox, it didn't matter. We created an adopted nuno and nuna, a couple or an individual, depending on what their circumstances was, that was most like them, that was already a member of the church, and they thought of these people, these newcomers, as if they were their godchildren or godparents. And that way, they included them in every aspect of it. Now, this is not just my opinion. It's already validated over and over again. There's a phenomenal book called Better Together. It was written by Dr. Robert Putnam from Harvard. He's also the one that wrote Bowling Alone, some of the most incredible empirical research on organizations. And in Better Together, it was a case study of about 12 different organizations that have continued to grow and grow and grow. One of them was a church. That was one of those big box non-denominational churches. So when you look at the case study in Better Together, it's found in chapter 6 of the book, although the rest of the book is fascinating. What they found is that a welcome package is not enough. You have to connect them with people who are similar to them, that escort them into the life of the church and to get them to come back for more. So I want to challenge you to think about, how do you convert your welcoming ministry from being a lot more than just a greeting in the narthex. I always tell a story about, because pre-COVID I would travel all the time to different parishes, and one parish I walked in there and they handed me a bulletin and I sat in the back, and all of a sudden the guy leans over to me and goes, "Hey, in this church, do they take communion through the main aisle or the side aisle?" And I said, "I don't know, I'm a visitor." I said, "Ask the guy next to you." So he leaned over to the guy next to him and he asked him the same question. The guy said, "I don't know, I'm a visitor too." So there were the three stooges sitting in the back of the church, and we had no clue, because nobody bothered to take some time to figure out that we were newcomers, and show us the way and teach us the way. Now, there's another bit of empirical research that proves how dynamic a welcoming ministry can be in this regard. And this comes from another book that I think is essential reading for every church leader, whether you're clergy, parish council, stewardship ministry. I cannot urge you enough to get the book Rebuilt. I love the subtitle on it. It's called Awakening the Faithful, Reaching the Lost, and Making Church Matter. It is the story of a priest and his pastoral assistant in a Catholic parish in Timonium, Maryland, just north of Baltimore, that was declining. And they went on a year-long study throughout the entire United States of what worked well in churches, and then they adapted that into a Catholic infrastructure and a Catholic ecosystem. The Rebuilt story is so powerful, they actually have a Rebuilt association. I've been blessed to the work that I've done with the Archdiocese here in Atlanta. They invited me to attend a program where Father White and Tom Corcoran come around, and they actually teach the principle. There's actually a Rebuilt association that you can join. They have a website. They do an annual conference and whatnot. But I want to again encourage you to read chapter 6 of this book, where they talk about their comprehensive welcoming ministry. And it was one of the critical things, along with one of the other topics we're going to talk about today, that transformed their church, Nativity Church, and tripled their weekend church attendance, and ultimately allowed it to create one of the most vibrant churches across the United States. Now, I tell this story and I go into much greater detail when we do the live program and Q&A and stuff like that, but I always challenge people to say, everybody thinks they're so welcoming, but this is what we strangers feel like when we come to the coffee hour in your parish. And if you can't read the cartoon, it says the after service coffee, where newcomers can get to know each other in the congregation. That guy in the middle is most frequently me. Y'all are talking to each other and your kubati and your friends and your cousins and your business partners, associates, and the newcomer is left to fend for themselves, right? And so I want you to think about this in the context of, anytime a newcomer comes into the parish, do something to make sure that somebody is walking them around the coffee hour and introducing them to everyone and inviting them to engage with everyone and getting them to meet everyone. At our little mission parish up here in Cumming, Georgia, Father Barnabas's parish, we have a separate table in our coffee hour that is reserved for anybody that's visiting the parish, whether you're new to Orthodoxy, non-Orthodox, or you're just visiting, you're coming through, whatever. And that's where Father Barnabas sits. and he does a little interview of everybody that's there, and we're always looking at Father B's table, because if he points to us and motions us over, we go over there. What it means is he's done enough of the Q&A to realize this person's a young lawyer, I'm going to get my lawyer to talk to them. This person has a kid with special needs, I'm going to get my special needs parent. And next thing you know, we're all around these people welcoming them, right? That's the best way to do it. Now, if you want an easy way to do it, here's another easy way to do it. So you can see the caption in our cartoon said, the board decided that John will remain the head greeter until his medication wears off, right? So you can medicate people to be happy and smiling and whatnot. But what it will make the most fundamental difference in the culture of your parish, and it will have direct stewardship impact, is creating a welcoming, loving community which was inspired by the fundamental message that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ gave us in John 13:34, that we are to love one another as he loved us. And then he punctuated it, and he said very clearly, by this they will know you are my disciple, that you have love for one another. So saying you're a disciple of Jesus Christ doesn't make you a disciple of Jesus Christ. Loving one another, being welcoming and caring, makes you a disciple of Jesus Christ. Welcoming ministry has to be one of the critical things you focus on, not only for your church as a whole, but also as part of your stewardship strategy. Now, the 8th principle in the 15, and the second one we're going to talk about tonight, is a thanking culture. And I want to kind of give you a little bit of a biological lesson here. And I know this sounds funny because I know we have medical experts in this group over here, and here's some, stupid lawyer talking about medicine. Well, actually, there's 4 different hormones that are driven into our system. Our Creator made it this way. So you've heard of endorphins, kind of the pain masking chemicals, and you've heard of dopamine, that is kind of the addictive performance chemical. It's meant to motivate us and achieve goals and whatnot. But today I want to talk about the 2, what I call the selfless chemicals, the happiness or the cuddle hormones, as they're sometimes referred to. And they are oxytocin and serotonin. Now, these are chemicals that your body produces that drive behavior. So oxytocin is a hormone that is produced, and it creates positive feelings, and it arises when we have emotional bonds and physical touch, kind of that warm feeling that you get when you spend with someone that you like. There's actually a chemistry activity going on in you because your Creator made you that way. And serotonin is the chemical that's produced when we're respected and admired, and it given positive treatment. It's kind of a boost in our confidence and kind of makes us feel awesome. Now, why do we talk about that? Because true appreciation and expressions of gratitude are among the greatest motivators. I mean, let's be honest. Who doesn't like to be thanked? Even if you merely did what was expected of you, the opportunity to say thank you and to receive a thank you that's sincere, not just, false flattery, but a sincere thank you is a motivational thing, because go back to those 2 hormones. They are driving those 2 hormones, reproduction, and they make you feel better. Expressions of appreciation always reinforce the desired behavior. And for most people, the more, and sometimes even the more public, the better. So you really cannot thank enough. Now, again, I'm not giving you my opinion, my brothers and sisters. I'm going to quickly blow through. I'm not going to study these, but there's a 2014 study in Emotion. The conclusion was thanking people made them more likely to seek an ongoing relationship. Let me say that again. Thanking people, just thanking people, made them more likely to seek an ongoing relation. A 2012 study in personality and individual differences concluded that grateful people were more likely to take care of their health. And Dr. Robert Emmons, who's one of the leading gratitude researchers, if you focus on the science of gratitude, says that gratitude increases happiness and reduces depression. Go back to those hormones, those bodily chemistry that your Lord, your Creator, put inside of you that shows that this works. There's a 2012 study from the University of Kentucky, and I like this one because it's kind of appropriate in today's climate. People who thanked more retaliated less and were more pro-social. And if you think about it, and I will tell you, one of the experiments I'm going to encourage you to do is decide that you're going to be a thanker. And tomorrow, here's what I want you to do. Everybody you interact with, and I know we have fewer interactions now in this COVID-induced day, I want you to say thank you, and I want you to say thank you repeatedly, okay? A workman came by to look at a project that we were going to have done at the house over here. I must have thanked him 15 times, and all he was doing was taking measurements and stuff like that. And I watched the behavior that this man had as we talked today. And all of a sudden it melted away. And he said, let me tell you, let me give you a secret about how you do this more effectively, how we do this project more efficiently. I didn't ask him for a deal, but I'm telling you that gratitude that he felt, that relationship, that bond that he felt made a difference. And even in the 2014 study of the applied sports psychology, they realized that gratitude increased an athlete's self-esteem, which is an essential component to optimal performance. So I want you to think about that as you think about how you interact with your children, your spouse, the people you work with, the people in your church, everybody. The more we thank, the better off we're going to be. So what does this mean? I've made a non-complete or an incomplete list, but a non-exclusive list of the areas that we need to be thinking about thanking. The more you do it personally, the better off it is. Again, the more you do it personally, the better off it is. I'm going to give you some ideas in a second. The more you do it genuinely. If they can tell that it's a fake thank you, if it's a form or formalistic thank you, it has no impact. Doing it in writing is better than not doing it in writing. Now, you should do it orally, you should do it personally, but you should also do it in writing. If you can do it publicly. Because again, remember that second hormone that's created, that serotonin hormone that's created when there's a public recognition of the thankfulness that comes from that. Do it repeatedly, over and over and over and over again. Show that you really mean it. Do it for everything and encourage others to thank people and then share the thanks. So in other words, if somebody's thanking you for something, then you think about how you can share that thanks with someone else. So you heard me in some of the previous programs say, I'm thanking you for allowing me to do this program. Why am I thanking you? I'm thanking you because you have given me an opportunity to serve the Lord. You have given me an opportunity to serve you. You have given me an opportunity to live and fulfill my stewardship calling. I owe you a debt of gratitude, not the other way around. So share it all the way you can. Now, one of the best techniques that has been demonstrated, again, scientifically over and over again, is to write personal notes or thank you cards. And if you can't do that, at least sign the letter in your own signature. Use blue ink. You know why blue ink? Because now they can tell that it wasn't a photocopy, right? Because if it's black ink, it could just be a photocopy, mimeograph, whatever the case may be. But if it's blue ink, and I know we can do color copying that makes it look good, it actually looks like it's original. But if you can write a personal note or thank you card, it makes a materially bigger difference than anything else you can do. So you need to write personal notes or thank you cards, or at least personally sign it with a note for all stewardship pledges. Anytime you have a volunteer that works for you on any one of your ministries, any service that they provide in a ministry, each contribution of anything that they contribute, sometimes just merely attending something, if you will thank them for attending this ministry program, this Bible study, whatever the case may be, you are reinforcing the behavior you want. Thank you for mentoring. Thank you for serving others. And I will tell you, and everybody in the development area knows this technique, right? So when my kids, they went to Christian schools because I thought it was important they learn that, right? So the first time they go to the new Christian high school and we made a contribution to the annual campaign and the building fund, we get a letter of thank you for our contribution. And it's a form letter, I get that, but written in the bottom in handwritten writing is a note from the headmaster. And it said, "Dear Bill and Audrey, when we saw Alexis score the winning basket in the GAC game, I was cheering from the stands." Or, "Dear Bill and Audrey, when Ileana sang that solo in the choir, it was just lifted my heart to the heavens." And I looked at my wife and I said, the headmaster knows us and he knows our kids. It was afterwards when I worked on the development campaign that I realized, well, Zach didn't really go to everything, but he had spotters. So when the letter came to send a letter to the Marianuses, if he didn't know us, they'd say, "Hey, that one kid plays basketball, the other kid's a singer, put something in there, Now that sounds a little bit disingenuous, and I'm not suggesting you should be disingenuous, because what I am telling you is he did take the time to get to know what was the key element of connection between us and our kids and each of them, and he would acknowledge that. In every letter and every thank you we got for everything, whether we were volunteering, when my wife volunteered to be the volleyball mom, or I volunteered to be the mock debate coach, it didn't matter. There was always a personalized note, and it always reinforce that behavior. Ken Makowski finally said it really best. He said, you either have a thank you culture or you do not have a very good one. You either have a thank you culture or you don't have a very good one. So I'm challenging you to think about, what is the thank you culture in your parish? If you're the priest, I know that's an enormous responsibility in you, because you got to be thanking a lot of people. But those of you that are in the stewardship ministry, I want you to think about how you can inspire a thanking ministry so that every act of stewardship that exists, whether they're helping to work at a festival, whether they're cleaning the garbage cans, whether they're fixing the candles, or whether they're donating money, it doesn't matter. You are personally thanking them. You're publicly thanking them. You are with seriousness and openness in your heart, you're thanking them. So those are the two sides of the emotional chemical dialogue of welcoming and thanking. When we welcome and we thank, we massively increase the oxytocin that is released within your system, and we massively increase the serotonin that's released in people's systems. And both of those two hormones are going to drive a cultural change in their behavior. It's not manipulative. Your Lord created you that way. He gave you that hormonal development to encourage you to be more loving, to be more caring, to be more thanking, and to be more welcoming. So now we're going to go to the 9th of the 15th process, and one of my favorites, youth stewardship. Now, this is something that will come as perhaps a novel conversation for many of you, because it seems to be a novel conversation that I hear over and over again. And so I always like to begin with chaos theory. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with chaos theory, but chaos theory was developed by Dr. Edward Lorenz, who's a classic underachiever. His degrees are from Dartmouth, Harvard, and MIT. And Dr. Lorenz is credited with creating chaos theory, which is the study of dynamic systems. And the key conclusion there is that small differences in the initial conditions yield widely diverging outcomes. Now, the principal beneficiary of chaos theory was weather meteorology. What he used was, he was a meteorologist, and what he figured out was, if there's slight changes in this very dynamic system of weather, it will materially change the outcome that occurs. Now, what does chaos theory have anything to do with youth stewardship? Well, actually, we find the answer in Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. There is no more dynamic system that you will have in your church ecosystem than your youth and emerging adults. They are the most dynamic system. And what I'm telling you is, if you will work on that dynamic system at the beginning, the result that occurs down the line will be unimaginable. But it comes from training the children in the way we want them to go. Now, you instinctively think about that when you think about some of the values and the training and the education that you provide your kids. But my question to you is, have you thought about it in the context of stewardship to the church? So let me ask you a couple of provocative questions. And again, all my data sources are listed at the bottom of the slide. So unlike other politicians, I challenge you to fact check me, because I'm giving you the data source in the beginning over here. So let me just give you a little bit of data that I've always found fascinating in this concept of youth discipleship and youth stewardship. According to a study in Forbes, now this is 2012, the average American family spent $671 per child per year on just sports training and costs. Just sports stuff per child per year, $671 per child per year. Now, Activity Hero went and said, okay, let's look at all enrichment activities that you're spending on your kid. How much is that? And their data suggested that, and again, this is from 2019, that on average, we spend about $2,400 per child per year on all enrichment support. Now, that includes the money we spend on sports or music or dance or arts or education or language or whatever it is you're doing over and above whatever the kids are doing in school or whatever your family is doing in the family. We spend on average in America $2,400 per child per year on all enrichment. Now, I'm not here to say that's bad. In fact, we did the same thing when our kids were growing up. But here's the question I want to ask you. So how much did you spend on your children's religious enrichment last year? The answer, regrettably, for most of our families is zero. Yet, when you look at the data, this comes right out of the NCAA's study of 2017, only 0.05% of all children who play high school sports will play professional sports. Now, this isn't all kids who play any sport. These are the kids who've actually made a high school team. And yet, less than 1/10 will actually ever play sports in professional context. And yet, 100% of your children will eventually stand before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. So the question I ask you is, what's a better investment for your children's future than their spiritual health? And I suggest to you that there's probably no better investment that you can start to think about in your parishes than a full-time, paid, trained youth director pastoral assistant. Now, I'm not telling you to stop spending the money on all of the other extracurricular things you're doing in your children's life. But what I'm telling you is, if I don't see on your budget that you as a church are paying for a full-time, trained, professional youth director pastoral assistant, then stop telling me stewardship or stop telling me your youth is important, because it isn't, because you're not investing in the thing that is most valuable. And the regrettable proof that we are failing our youth was found in the very first data set of slides that I presented to you, that showed you that somewhere, and again, depending on which study you look at, between 34% to as high as 64% of our youth are claiming no religious affiliation. They're leaving our churches. And we can see when it's happening because other data that we have shows us that in a research study that was done of OCF college chapters. These are the Orthodox Christian Fellowship. This is our college ministry in the Orthodox Church. 73% of all the OCF chapters had 10 or fewer members. 10 or fewer members. My brothers and sisters, if you went on a college campus and put up a sign that said, tomorrow we're going to meet in the quad to save the squirrels, you'd get more than 10 people there. And for arguably one of the most important things we can do, their Christian formation, their Christian development, we can't get 10 or more in our chapters. Now, I'm not here to just try and decry on the failure of OCF. What I'm saying is this is evidence of a problem of our lack of investment in the days than we could have. And some of you are going to say, oh, well, but Marianus, you gave me all these statistics that said, but that's universally true. Well, the point is, it's only universally true for churches that haven't invested in it. And the best example I can give you is, I don't know if how many of you are familiar with the Passion Conference. It occurs every year, the first weekend in every year. It's broadcast live in 4 major cities. Hundreds of thousands of college-age young people come together in stadiums from Houston, Atlanta, Nashville, Washington, and they go for 3 days. They pay to go. This isn't free. No one's subsidizing this. They pay to stay at hotels. They pay for their transportation. And for 3 intense days, they are brought together in worshiping the Lord, and they have preachers and they have music. And yes, it's not a religious service. It's not an Orthodox service. And yet so many of our Orthodox kids go there. So years ago, I was so excited. I was so interested in this. I got a friend of mine who goes to one of the churches that sponsors this to invite me to go to the Georgia Dome, right before the Georgia Dome ceased to be the Georgia Dome. 65,000 college kids, and they put me all the way at the top so I could watch this. There, just on fire, engaged, listening to preaching and whatnot. So don't tell me that this is a universal problem. It's not a universal problem if we will start to make the necessary investment. So here are the questions. What have you taught your children about the stewardship of God's gifts? How many times have you sat down with your own children, or if you're a grandparent, your grandchildren, or if you're a godparent, your godchildren, and actually had a conversation with them about stewardship? And talk to them about how important it was and what it means to be a good steward. And what have you modeled for your children regarding your personal stewardship? Do they know what you do? Do they know what you give? Not in the sense of bragging about it, but in terms of saying this is so important that this is a critical priority. Or do you teach them the dollar club? Now, you all know what the dollar club is, right? You know, the tray comes around, everybody throws $1 in. I always joke about this because from the time I was a little kid, I used to go to church with my Yaya Bessie, and she would always give me $1 to throw in the tray. And I joke about the fact that, you know, her purse smelled like mothballs and the dollar smelled like mothballs. But I actually did the math. So that $1 my Yaya Bessie would give me in the 1950s is the equivalent of $9.70 today. If you're still putting $1 in the tray, now, you know, I don't believe you should have trays, but if you have a tray, if you're still putting $1, let me just be honest with you. You are cheating God and his church to the tune of $9.70. And what's worse is you're teaching your children to do that bad behavior. And so think about what behavior they're watching and modeling. Well, what can you do? You heard me talk about this before. I'm going to talk about it again, and there'll be a third time we're going to talk about it. I call it the 10-10-80 rule. Dave Ramsey teaches it with a different name. Pastor Andy Stanley calls it give, save, live. You can call it whatever you want to. Most of you already know it or have heard of it. The first 10% of your income is your tithe. It goes to the kingdom, God's kingdom. We'll talk about what that means secondly. The second 10% you put aside, whether it's your retirement, your IRA, your savings, or a rainy day fund, and you learn to live on the 80%. By the way, this same process should be applied in the budget of your church. You should be giving away at least 10% of your church's income back into the kingdom, causing it to put out there and multiply. Whether you do the Good and Faithful Steward Challenge, whether you do something else with it. You should be setting aside another 10% for reserves, for rainy day funds, for roofs that leak or air conditioning need to be replaced. And you should learn to live off the 80%. You teach your children the 10-10-80 rule, and I promise you, when the day comes and they need money because of their car breaks down, or they get to the age of the retirement, they will thank you about it. When I first sat down and started to talk to my kids about the 10-10-80 rule, and I said, we're going to start putting away, it was a small dollar amount at that point because they didn't make much money. And when they were going through school and we were still teaching the tithe and the 10-10-80 rule and putting it away. And so finally, when they got their first job, I said, so let me tell you, now that you got a job, let me tell you what it's going to look like. And I used any of the website services that you can see out there that show compounding effect. I said, so if we put 10% of your money away over time, when you retire at age whatever, here's how much money you're going to have. They were blown away. They said, what, are you kidding me? And none of them had careers that were going to make them a lot of money. And yet this works. So the question is, what are you doing to teach them? Now, one of the things that was real interesting when I first started talking about youth stewardship, and I would engage the youth in a conversation, I would ask them a question. I said, when I say stewardship, what do you think about? Now, when I say that to adults, you know what your answer is. Money. How much do I give to the church? You know what the number one answer was when I would ask kids when I said stewardship? It wasn't money, because you ain't been talking to them about giving money to the church. The number one answer I got was the environment, the planet, which would obviously make Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew's heart rise to great occasion, because he's been talking about that a long time. So I decided, well, let's take them in the direction they're going, and let's see how we can do it. I said, well, tell me what you think about the concept of stewardship and the environment. They said, well, we want to think about being better stewards of our environment. We want to think about being better stewards of the creation that God has entrusted in us. And I said, would it help you if I gave you some resources that could teach you how to do that? And they said, yes. So I went and I found a researcher who's devoting her life to preserving God's creatures and God's creation. Now, this one didn't take me very far. Well, it actually took me far, but it didn't seem that way. So I interviewed my daughter, who got her PhD from Johns Hopkins. Now, it took it far because she was in the jungles of Trinidad at the time. By the way, she's currently now in the jungles of Brazil and can't get out of Brazil. And yes, that's a picture of that goofy child of mine sitting on the first alligator that she ever captured when they were doing alligator embryology studies to see what the impact was of pollution on alligators. Okay. And I brought her into my Ancient Faith radio studio one of the few times she was back in the country. And I said, let's talk about stewardship over God's creatures and God's creation from a theological perspective and a scientific perspective. And then let's give the listeners some practical things they can do. So we recorded this podcast. It's available again on Ancient Faith Radio on my Stewardship Calling thing, if you go to the July 3rd, 2019 date. And I've played it for kids. So we teach them the theology of stewardship of God's creatures and God's creation, very lightly, but very importantly. She talks about the science behind it. And then the key part was we gave them 3 things that they can do, 3 categories of ways they can be better stewards over God's creation and God's creation. Now, you can use this. Again, this is free, folks, so there's no consequence. There's no benefit for me or my family or anything like that. You can use this as part of the stewardship program for your youth to help get them thinking about how they can become better stewards in the context of serving God's creatures and God's creation. If you go to my website and you go to the Stewardship Calling page on July 3rd, 2019, I've also provided you 2 additional resources. One is the patriarchal encyclical for the protection of the environment, the indiction from 2019 from His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew I, which is very inspirational if you've never read it. And then the second thing is a very focused PowerPoint presentation on stewardship over God's creatures and God's creation. This is one that I did when I made a presentation at the OCA's All-American Council in 2018 based on the same data that my daughter gave me, telling you what's going on with the environment. My point is, again, all this is available to you if you want to do it. This is the way you can reach kids to something that's important to them and use these resources to develop some modules to teach them the concept of stewardship in a direction they already want to go. Now let's talk about a few other things. Here's the key point. If you don't have a youth stewardship program that teaches true stewardship, you've determined the future of your parish, and it ain't going to be pretty. If you don't have a youth stewardship program, don't complain to His Eminence. Don't complain to me or Steve or Chris or anybody else 5 or 10 years from now when you realize that next generation didn't doing a better job of taking care of God's creatures and God's creation and God's church and God's needs and the church's needs and stuff like that, because that's our failing. And if you go back to the very first session I taught on the science of generosity studies, that amazing collection of research that's now been done at the University of Notre Dame on generosity within the context of church, one of the key critical conclusions of the science of generosity studies was kids, adults, learn how to be stewards when they're young. They make a decision about the kind of steward they're going to be when they're young. You're determining your future. So the point of all this to say is you have to have a youth stewardship program. Now, we have to have different messages and solicitations depending on age. The way you're going to teach stewardship to your little bitty kids is different than the way you're going to engage kids in stewardship conversations as high schoolers. So this is not a one-size-fits-all thing, but it is something that is required for every one of them. Just like your kids have different clothing sizes as they grow up, the size of their stewardship program, what they do, has to change. But you have to use understandable examples and messages. If you start talking about giving money, okay, that's at a certain point in time, that is an appropriate message in teaching the 10-10-80 rule. But when you're talking to a little bitty kid, that's not going to resonate with them. So you have to use understandable examples and messages. The reason why I invested in creating all those resources for you on stewardship over God's creatures and God's creation is because that's what kids were saying they wanted to spend time on, they wanted to work towards. And what a beautiful thing if your church becomes known as the church that does so much more for the environment, for the community, for the trees in your neighborhood. I don't care what it is. Make the messages understandable. Don't just teach the parable of the talents and expect that the kids are going to make and understand that. You have to include all youth in the annual parish stewardship campaign. And hear me clearly on this. The youth must offer their own stewardship pledge. They do not get to ride mommy and daddy's coattails. They have to learn from a very early age, we are looking to them to be stewards. And they've got to pledge time and talents always, and eventually some treasures. And not treasures that mommy and daddy give them. You have to teach them to take that which they get, however they get it, whether it's grandma gives them money, whatever the case may be, or they earn a little money. They have to give from amongst their riches, not somebody else puts the money in the envelope for them. I cannot tell you how critically important it is that you have a stewardship program and a stewardship solicitation for your youth, separate apart from the parents, and for all ages, starting from when they're an early kid. Now, other things you need to do. This is where you can help them by sponsoring service opportunities, including as they get older, mission trips. I will tell you that the Christian high school my kids went to required all the kids to go on at least one mission trip sometime during their 4 years in the high school instead of spring break, right? And the church would, the school would organize these mission trips. And I will tell you that both of my kids came back from those mission trips transformed. If you have any kids in your parishes that have been to Project Mexico or anything that IOCC has done, or any mission trip that they've been on, I will promise you they come back transformed. At the appropriate age, a mission trip abroad is incredible. But don't forget the mission trip that you can do within your own community. So when we took middle schoolers to work at a homeless shelter and to help care and feed for the homeless, that was a local mission trip that was transformational for a lot of the kids. But you have to use creative processes to help youth start and discern their gifts and callings. In other words, don't tell them what they're good at. Get them to tell you what they like to do, and then find a way for them to do whatever it is that they want to do. And teach them that that's part of what God has given them, these gifts, talents, and abilities, these interests, these passions, and encourage them to use them. Remember what St. John Chrysostom said in The Art of Leadership, to the full for the benefit of all. Ultimately, you need to send materials home for the parents to reinforce teaching and messaging about stewardship. In other words, don't rely on the parents to think of this themselves. You create it. The best churches that have incredible youth stewardship ministries send materials to the parents with information that they want to reinforce in a dialogue with their kids about it. And then ultimately, I want you to recognize youth who practice stewardship in the bulletins, in the other media, and here's the key thing, in testimonials in the church. Their examples will inspire others. I'm going to give you a concrete example. I was at a church not in your Metropolis, and I was doing a full weekend program over there, and I heard about a kid who was an Eagle Scout who, for his Eagle Scout Orthodox badge, decided to create kind of a food pantry at the church. And it was wildly successful. He earned his Orthodox merit badge and things of that nature. And it started to grow and it started to grow and he kept it going. So I'm sitting there as I'm doing this youth module. And of course the kid wasn't there, but I said, what have you done to recognize this kid? What have you done to honor this kid? What have you done to point to this kid that we are reinforcing this behavior? And they all kind of looked at me like I was speaking foreign language. Now, by the grace of God, I'm usually given the permission to give a short, 13-minute homily after church on Sunday in the parishes that I serve. So in the course of my homily, I used the example of this child and the extraordinary work that he had done to change the lives of people through this feeding ministry, and what an example he was to me and all the rest of them. What happened next was kind of amazing. Now, I didn't know this kid. I didn't met this kid. What I found out later was the kid was very shy. He was not one of those loquacious, outgoing types. He wasn't leading the Greek dance troupe. He was always kind of in the end of the line, right? He was mobbed at the church coffee hour. Everybody went up to him, patting him on the back, thanking him, congratulating him, giving him checks. He wasn't even asking for solicitation for stuff. So the kid and his parents come up to me to thank me. And I said, what are you thanking me for? You're an inspiration to me. Look at what happened here. You're an inspiration to this community. We have to thank you. You've done it. And I said, so what are you going to do with this? And the kid said, well, I've been kind of thinking about how we can grow this. I said, stop thinking and start doing. I said, Mom and Pop, are you behind? Yeah, we're behind this. And lo and behold, fast forward the story, they started a ministry at that church. When they built their new hall, they had to build a separate room to accommodate all the donations of food and materials that they were getting, all because one kid decided he was going to make a difference. And because we use that opportunity to shine the light that the Lord asked us in the Gospel of Matthew to be the light of the world. And when others saw it, they were inspired by that kid. And you know what else happened? I found out later. Other kids in that parish, not out of jealousy, but out of, hey, I can do something too. And one started this and one started that. And this is the reason why we need to do it. Now, one of the things that I realized across the Orthodox ecosystem is we don't have good youth stewardship ministry materials. So I have stolen one from a wonderful, wonderful Roman Catholic parish. This is a very, very simple pledge card. You can feel free to modify it any way you want to. But what I loved about this was from Ascension Church. They focused on time, talents, and treasures, right? And again, this can change depending on the age of the child. But if you look at time, look at the first thing that they're asking for them to check the box to be a steward of their time. Attending Mass every Sunday and on holy days. See, they were reinforcing in the minds of their youth that attending church is an act of stewardship of your time. And then they talked about other things, attending other mass services, reading together, praying together, reading the Bible 1 hour per week. You can read this on your own. The talent, they had already identified their youth ministries and invited them to check off the box to be a youth ministry. Look at, if you can see this on the screen, the last item is other. In other words, they were smart enough to say, hey, listen, we're not sure we've got all the youth ministries out there. If you've got another idea, check that box and tell us what it is. And then, of course, they focused on the bottom on treasure. Now, look at what they did. They broke it into 2 parts. Donate some toys or clothing, and donate part of your allowance or income in the weekly envelopes. And they would give them weekly envelopes. So they're encouraging the kind of behavior of time, talents, and treasures, right? Now, I also did a couple of additional Ancient Faith Radio broadcasts on this. My May 1st, 2019 program was just on youth stewardship, and you would recognize Steve Cristoforo, who's the director of the Youth and Young Adult Ministry of the of our GOA, and we did a whole program on what I call the forgotten most important stewards in our Orthodox Church, youth and emerging adults. A second one I want to point your attention to is the March 4, 2020 program. All these podcasts you can download for free forever, either by going to my website, stewardshipcalling.com, in the Ancient Faith Radio tab, or go to the Ancient Faith Radio tab and the Stewardship Calling page. All you need to know is the date. Scott Davenport is an incredible Orthodox convert who had 25 years in the music industry, and you could look, he represented Justin Bieber, Rihanna, Jay-Z, Aerosmith, Kanye West, the Eagles, Guns N' Roses. I mean, this guy was a very successful music industry professional, and converted to Orthodoxy and realized that his calling was to use all of his gifts, talents, and abilities to create creative media to teach Orthodox theology to our youth in an accessible manner. And he just started creating a series of books. He calls it the Neptic Warrior series. I love it and whatnot. And his first book that came out is called Press A to Begin, which is based using gaming terminology to teach kids theological principles. It's beautiful. We've prototyped it at a parish and did a retreat, and he's done a retreat on it, and it's been very effective. The kids engaged on it. If you listen to the March 4th program, you can listen to that. I also include links on the March 4th program to Scott's webpage where he has the book and other materials. And then back in 2017, I did a 2-parter, one in April and one in July, where again, I had Steve Cristoforo and of course, Dr. Ann Besarides, who you know is the person, the creator of our Office of Vocation Ministry and the incredible Crossroad and Telos programs. And again, the focus there on both of those was how do we create the concept of youth and emerging adult stewardship? And they talked about different aspects of it and whatnot. Now, just to close out on this thing, I want to give you some resources. Here are 2 really great Orthodox resources that we can now point people's attention to. The first one, I hope and pray that every one of you will download and engage in. It was recently released. It's Steve Cristoforo in the office, the Y2AM office, created the Effective Christian Ministry Program. It is absolutely an incredible, incredible, incredible program. And I'm telling you, you and your parish will get so much out of this. There's 3 amazing modules to help you lead young people to Jesus Christ. And there it is, effectivechristianministry.org. The second one came from the OCA. They have a Giving Children the Chance to Give program. It's a little bit older. It's a little bit more dated, but it's another effective Orthodox resource. And then I want to point out to you, I want to share with you a series of 3 additional resources. One is the Research from the National Study of Youth and Religion. One is a phenomenal book called Soul Searching. And then the last one, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Toledo actually created a youth stewardship program. And so I encourage you to look at that. And then 2 remaining resources from the Methodist Church. One, the Texas Methodist Foundation Youth Stewardship Principles, and the United Methodist Church. They actually have a 12-month stewardship program. I'm providing you these links so that you can look at them and take advantage of them. I hope and pray that you'll understand that if you don't create a youth stewardship program, if you don't start teaching stewardship to your youth, if you don't train them up in the way you want them to become, then that the chaos theory says they're going to go in an unpredictable manner and not in a great manner. All right, the final topic we're going to talk about tonight, I'm leapfrogging to item number 14. We're going to come back and fill the other ones up in the next session, but I wanted to cover this one because it kind of naturally fell together. This is what's called small groups. Now, some of you are familiar with small groups, some of you are not. Here's the phrase I want you to commit to memory. The bigger a church gets, the smaller it must become. The bigger a church gets, the smaller it must become. Now that seems a little oxymoronic, right? I mean, how do you get to be bigger and smaller at the same time? Here's the point that we're trying to say there. As our parishes continue to grow and grow and grow, the biggest loss that occurs is intimacy. The more you're in a bigger group, the less intimate the group is. The more you're engaging with more people, the less connected you are. How many times have you been a part of a group and you go, oh, Maria, I'm sorry, I never see you anymore. We don't get to, you feel a loss in there, right? Now, we've been called to make disciples of all nations. We've been called to build our churches. That's phenomenal. This is not an argument against growth. This is an argument for growth, but at the same time that we're using growth, we're creating the continuation of that intimacy that will allow the growth to be built upon a strong foundation. So let's talk about the power of small groups. What are they, first of all? Now, there's not a universal definition. There's a lot of latitude here. I'm just going to give you one model of it that I know works and is effective, but that is by no means to suggest this is the only way to do it, okay? Generally, it's about 10 people. If it gets much bigger than that, again, the intimacy is lost, who gather weekly or bi-weekly or maybe even monthly at homes, and they do two things. They explore a spiritual topic, some religious content, and they discuss what life is dealing with them. Two parts. There's a theological component and a one anothering component. It's not just a pure Bible study. That can be a small group, but I'm talking about something much richer than that. Not richer in the sense of saying that the gospel can't be totally rich. Of course it can be. But there's another level of fulfillment we want to bring when we connect people with one another, right? When we give people the opportunity to get to know each other and to love each other and to care for each other and to find ways to serve each other. I was participating in a small men's group kind of thing, right? And we were studying a theological text, and then we would just spend time talking. Now, we would always talk about the theological text, but then we'd start talking and learning about each other. And one guy admits to an addiction, and none of us knew this guy had the addiction. I mean, it was just staggering to think of this leader of the church who confessed to an addiction, right? And then lo and behold, another guy needs a kidney. And guess what? One of the other small group members, who was not related to him in any way, donated a kidney. Now, I'm not telling you this is the way to solve all problems. What I am telling you is that level of relationship and intimacy and connection is important, just as it is important to teach whatever the theological concept we want to. And it's proven in Orthodox, even though the non-Orthodox have made it valid. If we look at the Gospel of Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, we reminded where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am with us. But it's Hebrews 10, 24, 25 that makes the point even clearer. And let me read it to you. And let's read it together. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. This is where the concept of one anothering comes from, right? Love one another, care for one another, be there for one another, help one another, right? It's all about, and it is a theological principle that is ingrained in our Orthodox theology. And yet somehow we've allowed the non-Orthodox, and particularly the big box non-denominational churches, to prove its validity. But it's still ours. There's a phenomenal resource out there. It's called the smallgroupresources.net. It's footnoted at the bottom. And the founder of smallgroupresources.net, their whole mission is to help any Christian church of any denomination expand a small group ministry. He articulated, I think very succinctly, the 10 biggest benefits of small groups. He said, life change happens best in small groups. I mean, that guy never stood up in church and said to the entire congregation, I have a problem with this addiction. But he felt very comfortable in our group sharing that addiction. Secondly, small groups make churches personal. Look, we've all been in our churches where sometimes yes, of course, the liturgy can have a very highly dramatic and interpersonal communication piece. But then the rest of it is just kind of lost in the shuffle. But a small group always makes us have a personal connection with our church. I love this one. Small groups provide a nearly unlimited leadership development pipeline. Here's why. The leaders of all your small group ministries have to go through a leadership program. And so now what you're doing is you're training the next generation of ministry leaders, the next generation of parish council members, the next generation of Metropolis council members, the next generation of maybe even politicians in your states. But you're creating a leadership development training program through the small groups. Think about it. If your small groups are divided into groups of 10, well, divide the number of people you have in your parish by 10. Think of how many new leaders you're developing. I love this one too. Off-campus small groups provide an unlimited space at optimum times. Now, those of you on the West Coast, and particularly those of you in California or in major metro areas, know how horrific traffic has become. Think about it. If I said to you, you need to come to the small group ministry and it's going to be at your church, you're scratching your head going, oh, I'm going to try and fight the traffic for an hour and a half to get to church by 6:30. But what if I told you you didn't have to drive to church? You can drive 5 minutes away to some Orthodox Christian that lives in your neighborhood that's gathering a small group in his neighborhood. Two things have happened. Number one is you've just gotten a lot of time given to you. And number two, the church has now gathered an unlimited amount of space, because now it's not dependent on conflicting demands for the church hall, because every house can become an extension of the church. Number five, come over to my house is a much easier invitation than come with me to church. In fact, when my former partners would invite me to come to some of their activities, every activity they invited me to come to was a small group meeting at their house, because that's an easy invitation. But I said, come to my big box church or come to my big, beautiful Orthodox church, that's a little intimidating. Number six, small groups provide the best opportunity for one anothering. Again, we get to know each other. We get to love one another, care for one another, understand what's going on with one another. In other words, when I know what's happening with you, my first greeting to you is not, hey, Steve, how you doing? It's like, hey, Steve, I remember that you told me that your kid is sick or your dog is sick or you got this problem at work. How's that going? Right? That connection is stronger. Number seven, small groups can provide a sense of family for many whose biological family lives far away. By the way, this happens a lot in communities. When I first moved down to Atlanta, the rest of my whole family was in the Chicago area. So if I now have a new family in my cathedral community in Atlanta, all of a sudden now I have a new family that's been given to me. So think about all those people who may have been in your church for a while, but still have family in foreign areas. You can ask questions in a small group. You know how intimidating it is to stand in a large group and raise your hand and say, wait, Father, I didn't understand what you just said. But if there's 5 or 6 or 7 of you in the room, you can see each other's expression. And somebody says, you know, Joe, you look like you didn't understand what we just said. And it's easier for Joe to say in a small group, I don't. Number 9, small groups make it possible for more people to be cared for between Sundays, right? Because this is not, see, all too often we've allowed the Orthodox Church to become a Sunday-only experience. And that's a huge mistake. It's a huge problem. And one of the ways we can serve one another better is by allowing these small groups to work. And finally, small groups provide an ever-expanding network for communication and impact. Now imagine if the priest wants to communicate a message to his faithful. Yes, he can put it in the bulletin. Yes, he can make it in the announcements in church. But what if he just sent a message to all the small group leaders? Say, hey, listen, next time you have a small group meeting, remind the faithful that we're doing this blood drive. We're doing this feeding ministry, right? It's a great communications tool. Now, again, none of this is my theory. I gave you the reference to the book on the right, Better Together, which was the Robert Putnam case study of the book on the left, which was the seminal book that he wrote a long time ago. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called Bowling Alone. It's one of the most phenomenal books if you ever want to study about why organizations die. They did empirical research on literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations. But the only ones that survived and grew, and it didn't matter whether it was a church, a club, a bowling club, a knitting club, it did not matter, was when social capital was high. Now, what's social capital? Social capital is 2 things. The collective value of everyone you know, your social network. And the second thing is the desire to do things for each other that our networks foster. It's called reciprocity. If you do me a favor, then I want to be reciprocal to you. As I've said, lo and behold, you know, do me a favor and I owe you a favor. Do a favor for my kid, I owe you everything, right? And if you look at the way social capital works in a community, you can actually see it very effective. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call. Some of you know Father Ted Barbas, who's the chancellor of the Metropolis of Boston. And he said, Brother Bill, he said, I'm sending you one of our best. He's moving to Atlanta, and you better take care of him. And I said, got it, done, don't worry about it. Kid moves to Atlanta. He's not even here a matter of 2 days, and I'm on the phone with him. And I did a 2-hour interview of this young man. learned everything about him from the time he came down the birth canal to the time he arrived in Atlanta. Found out what he wanted to do, what he liked doing, what he didn't like doing, everything about him. And I identified no less than 17, or maybe it was more than that, people that could immediately help this kid. And I immediately reached out to those 17 or whatever the number was. And I said, Sandy, you need to talk to him about a job. Joe, you need to talk to him about this. Ilyana, you need to talk to him about that. And lo and behold, these people, in that same interest in reciprocity, because they're part of the social network, started reaching out to him and saying, and I started getting a message back from this kid saying, hey, so-and-so called me and I met with him and he is going to do this and she's going to do that. And all of a sudden, this kid, who's a brand new stranger to this town, had been in Atlanta before, now starting to feel like he's got a family and he isn't related by blood to any one of us. This is the reason why this works. In that book that I recommended to you before that I think is required reading, Rebuilt, they also use small groups. That's chapter 9 of the book. And because once their church started growing again, that Roman Catholic Church started growing again, they realized that they're getting bigger, so they needed to get smaller. And they did a small group ministry, and it actually helped get them bigger and helped encourage a more flourishing ministries. There's another book that I recommend that you read. It just so happens this is also written by a Roman Catholic priest. This guy's from Canada, Father James Mallon. It's called Divine Renovation. I like that. Divine Renovation is a cute name. If you look at pages 168 to 176, I try to make this as efficient as I can for you. The book is great. You should read the whole book. But if you don't have time to read the whole book and you want to start a small group ministry, read pages 168 to 176, and you'll see how St. Benedict Church used a small group ministry, and they actually even created a mid-sized ministry because they got to be a mega church within the Roman Catholic system to grow their parish. Now, didn't used to have this, folks. I am so excited to finally be able to have 4 good Orthodox small group examples. One of them is from your holy Metropolis, Holy Trinity in San Francisco, that has done a version of a small group ministry. The second one on the bottom, on the right, comes from our very own Archdiocese Y2AM ministry. They saw, and Steve and I have been talking about small group ministries for years now. We even talked about it in those 2 programs that I had on my Ancient Faith radio. I said, man, you need to start a small group ministry with kids, and I mean young adults. And sure enough, he did. So Y2AM ministry started its small groups ministry, and I'm giving you the web links there, folks, so you can just click on them. That then led to the creation of the Orthodox Christian Fellowship Small Group Ministry Program, which is in the upper right-hand corner, which didn't used to exist. Now it's still in process of growing and expanding. It's not perfect, but there's resources. And then just to show you how strategic planning can drive behaviors, when I did the strategic plan for the cathedral here in Atlanta, which is now one of those big Orthodox churches, probably one of the largest in the country, and they realized they were getting way too big and they needed to get small. One of the things that came out of their strategic planning is they really wanted to begin a small group ministry. And by the grace of God, the son of one of your clergymen happens to be here in our town in Atlanta, and he decided to lead it. And so now the Annunciation Cathedral is started a small group ministry. It's still in its early phases. They've just gotten started, and then COVID hit. So, some of these things are going to be evolving. But I'm glad to point out that for up until the last year or so, I never had an Orthodox example I can point to, and now I've got 4. And I hope after you all start to do this, we're going to have even more. I'm also giving you 4 very excellent, top-in-class small group ministries from other churches, okay? So one of them is from the smallgroups.com. They have an enormous array of resources. That's in the upper left. In the upper right is North Point Community Church. It's the second largest church in America. They have about 40,000 members in 8 campuses. Their small group ministry is the most dynamic small group ministry I have ever seen. That's one of the ones I was invited to. I never went to it, but I've been invited to it repeatedly. But they have great resources, great materials. Oops. And then if you look at it on the lower left, the smallgroups.net that I referred to you has a lot of resources. And then, of course, one of the older churches that started small groups was the Saddleback Church. And you can see their small group ministry. So there's no excuse for you not to be able to have great resources available to you. I've given you 4 Orthodox ones, great websites, 4 non-Orthodox ones. And just to drive this point home, here are a series. I don't expect you to take these down. Download this presentation. Here are a series of articles that teach small group ministry. That's page 1. That's page 2. That's page 3. So I've given you 3 pages of articles that you can find that will teach you how to implement a successful small group ministry. So in session 4, which is coming up on October 13th, we're going to focus on effective messaging, campaigns, 3 different kinds of campaigns: stewardship campaigns, capital campaigns, and my favorite, planned giving campaigns. I'm going to teach you how to build a foundation for your church that's going to make it last well beyond many generations. Then we're going to talk about transparency, accountability, and we're going to end with talking about a stewardship team, which is one of the reasons why you're experiencing the problems that you're experiencing is by the absence of having a full-blown team. And I'm going to show you how all 15 of these elements can be organized into this team concept. Now, I'm joking by saying a word from our sponsor, but again, I'm not selling anything, folks, and everything's free. So, but I do want to tell you the thing I keep hearing over and over and over again, and if you watched the debate last night, you really got the sense of it, is the growing sense of issues that we're facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that's affecting all of us, mentally, spiritually, dynamically, emotionally, medicinally, in every possible way. And what had occurred to me was that it was time to try to provide context around all of this. And it struck me that, we always talk about 2020 vision as being perfect vision. Well, we've actually received perfect vision and gotten amazing insights into every bad thing that's been happening to us. And I'm going to cover every bad thing that has been happening to us for the last year during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to give you 3 specific, gospelly driven, but practical, proven techniques that you can do that to change your life and to make the rest of this life and every other year beyond that go on. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduling program. I leave you with the question I always leave you with before we go into the Q&A. Our Lord asking you, what did you do with my church under your watch, given all the gifts that I've given you? And with that, Brother Steve, do we have any questions? Do we have any comments? Do people want to jump in with questions and comments? Talk to me.
We do, Bill.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And certainly, as always, a great presentation. Lots of notes. We do have some questions, and I encourage everyone to also add any additional questions or comments, either in the chat session or you can come off of mute. Bill, I had one, as actually a couple came up, but hopefully we'll hear from others too. With youth, I think you may touch on it when you talk in the next session about the stewardship team itself, but besides the youth stewardship, your thoughts on youth on the stewardship committee itself, on the parish's stewardship committee. And I don't know if you want to touch on it today, or we can maybe talk about it more in the next session.
Let's go where we always want to answer the questions and go where the people want to take it. The answer is absolutely, unequivocally, without question, no hesitation. You have to have youth involved in your stewardship ministry. You have to have, when we talk about the team, I'm going to give you 10 jobs that need to be filled, and one of them is just going to be labeled youth. That has to include youth members on your stewardship team. And it's critically important, Steve, because what they're going to help you do is better calibrate the messaging and understand how it can be applied to them, because they're going to be able to translate it into the language that they and their peers are talking, right? And so, and frankly, what greater evidence of the importance of stewardship than to show that we are bringing our youth involved in it? And what greater opportunity to train the next generation of stewardship leaders and leaders within your church. So there can be no question about it that you need to invite youth. And I'm not just saying a token one youth member. I mean, you can feel free to have youth representatives from multiple different age groups. Now, you'll calibrate it, right? So they may not have to be present at every meeting. So when the stewardship committee is getting together to talk about their planned giving, a state giving campaign, well, maybe they don't have to be involved in that meeting, right? But they absolutely have to be involved and owning the messaging, the delivery of it, even the design of their stewardship cards, and then they have to be the ones that are the emissaries. So for example, frequently, Steve, what parishes do is they use their catechetical school, their Sunday school, to be the messaging point for their youth stewardship, right? So if you had stewardship ambassadors that went to each of the Sunday school classes and in their own way and in their own words talked about it and shared it with their friends, trust me, they're going to be a lot more credible than you or me walking in there. So thank you, whoever asked that question. God bless you. You're thinking correctly and ahead.
Great. Bill, we had another question on the small groups, and can we have 10 people gather at homes with COVID? I answered a bit of it in the chat session, but certainly want to hear your perspective too. So, gathering in these difficult times.
Yeah, so the last thing you ever want to do is ask a lawyer for medical advice, right? And look, I understand one thing. In fact, that's one of the things we're going to cover on that October 7th Ancient Faith Radio program is the unchristian behavior we've been demonstrating over each other in sitting in judgment of each other with people's different comfort levels regarding their COVID preparation. So I will never, ever, ever lecture anybody on what they can do. But let me answer your question two ways. I say the answer is yes, but there's two different alternatives. So I have seen small groups, church small groups, meeting now in the COVID period with social distancing. They wear their masks in. There is no common meal like there oftentimes used to be and stuff like that. And they sit together in a big enough room where they can sit in enough distance or outside. And you all have the benefit in a lot of the climates in your metropolis where you're going to have beautiful weather for an extended period of time. And they can do it outside. Having said that, if for whatever reason you are uncomfortable with that or don't think that's the appropriate behavior, I completely support your conclusion on that. You can do, it's not as effective, but it's better than nothing, a small group a chat via Zoom or Google Meetings or WebEx or whatever platform you want to use to continue to gather people together. It's the way a lot of the clergy have pivoted for their Bible studies, or other ministries have pivoted on some of their meetings in that regard. Again, it's not as effective, but we should, none of us felt like, okay, well, COVID's here, we got to close our churches, so that's good. I don't even have to think about the divine liturgy until His Eminence says the church is open. No, we figured out a way to participate in the divine liturgy as best we could under the circumstances and given our unique perspective. So the answer is, I would encourage you to do small groups, live and in person if you can, if you feel comfortable, if the circumstances would allow you to do that. And then I want to encourage you to do, if not that way, online. And we've seen, so one of the creative ways I saw a small group meet was, again, theirs is geographically based. And I want to cover one thing real quickly, Steve, if you allow me to, as His Eminence, not your Eminence, Metropolitan Erasmus's Metropolitan Alexius, says we put parentheses, so I'm going to go down a rabbit hole in a second. You've heard him say it, I'm sure, in synod meetings. But anyway, one of the church small groups found a outdoor gazebo at one of the parks near where all the people lived, where they could socially distance. And so they moved their women's small group meeting to that outdoor gazebo, and they were able to have their conversation, they were able to have that dialogue, and they felt comfortable doing it. The one rabbit hole I want to go down, and this is, I probably should have covered it in the outside. So again, there's not only one size fits all, you can do a lot of different ways, but I want you to think about three different kinds of small groups. So the one I focused on today was geographic, right? You pick people who live in a common geography because it's easier for them to get together, and they probably already know each other, or if not, they live in enough of a close knit community that they probably share some things in common. So a geographic small group tends to be the one that you see implemented the most in larger churches. But there's a couple of other ways you could look at that. Another one you could look at that is a demographic small group, right? So you could say, we're going to have, this is what I challenged Steve Cristoforo to do with YTAM. Let's think of a small group of teenagers, right? And let's create a small group of teenagers without regard to where their geography is. So there's a demographic similarity to them that would allow them to achieve a connectedness. Then the third one is an interest-based one. And I'll give you the most unique one that I've seen. So a church had, and when I say this, some of you are going to say, oh, well, that wouldn't be our situation. And then when you look at the numbers, you'd say it absolutely is your situation. They started a women's small group of any woman that had a miscarriage, right? Even if you subsequently had kids or whatnot. But the issues, and one of the women who'd had a series of miscarriages and had gone through all the emotional and important critical things that were going on, was the leader of this thing. And when they reached out, and I forget what Tanya may be able to tell us the answer, but an old statistic I remember is that like 1 in 4 pregnancies end up in a miscarriage. I mean, usually within the first couple of first trimester, but it's not an uncommon phenomenon. And so they formed a women's small group of women that just dealt with that had miscarriages. We've also seen small groups of Alcoholics Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, Porn Anonymous, whatever the case, whatever the addiction is, right? And so that's a third kind of small group that you can form, is if there's a unique common bond or a demographic relationship or a geographic relationship. And those you can sometimes continue even in the COVID period. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, Bill, and you actually answered a question that I had, which is, using small groups, but avoiding, the possibility of any cliques. But I think bringing together sort of the demographic or, groups of interest or common interests is certainly a very powerful way of bringing people together, and, not necessarily, creating subgroups within a parish. We do have a few other questions. There's a question around email marketing programs, the Constant Contact or Mailchimp. We could probably take that offline, unless you guys.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that next week, 2 weeks from now. We're doing one on communications. And what's the specific question, Steve?
Do you recommend any email marketing programs such as Constant Contact or Mailchimp? I know, quite a few of our parishes that I'm aware of are using Constant Contact. I think I've seen some with Mailchimp too.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a recommendation.
Yeah. The answer is I am a fan of all of those technologies that allow you to have a more extensive interpersonal relationship with your parishioners, with your stewards, with your donors. I am relatively agnostic on which one of those you use. All full and fair disclosure, I use Mailchimp, just because I've been using Mailchimp for a long time, but there's pluses and minuses of every one of these. But there's two big, so the beauty of those platforms is that they've thought through a lot of the challenges, and the beauty of them is that it allows you to communicate and do repeat messages. So some of you are actually already on my Mailchimp listing. I have a listing when I send out for every monthly program that I do. I send out an announcement of the program with a little flyer. If you want to be added to it, I'm not soliciting you because I don't solicit for anything. You can send me an email at bill@stewardshipcalling.com, bill@stewardshipcalling.com, and I'll add you to that list, and you'll get a once a month announcement of the next program. And if you're interested, you listen. If you're not, you don't have to. I use that because it's easy and I'm accustomed to doing it. And it also allows you to use the metrics, and you can see who's opened it, how many opened it, how many forwarded it, who's not doing it. I like actually being able to do the resend to the people that didn't open it last time, kind of button. So there's all these capabilities that those technologies offer you that I am a big fan of. So I'm a big fan of using all of those, any of those that want to work. But I want to make 2 points. I've made both of these points before, so this should be reinforcing. It should not be new. Number one, text messaging is far and away more effective than email messaging. Text messaging is far and away more effective and responsive than email messaging. Every time I do one of these programs, I will get some text messages from some of you flounders that are on this program. For those of you who remember Rocky and Bullwinkle, fan mail from some flounder. So I'll get a text message, and some of you send me an email message. I welcome all of that. I read the text messages first. Human nature tells us that, basically, go back to the data I gave you before, 98% of text messages are read, and 95% of text messages are read in 3 minutes or less. So whatever platform you're going to use, I'm not saying don't use email. You should. You have to. That's still a must. It's table stakes now. You also need to develop a texting platform. Last point, I told you there's 2 points I'm going to make. Second point, none of that, none of that will be as effective as an interpersonal communication. If you can talk to them in person, highly most effective. If you can talk to them via video, a little bit less, but better than nothing. If you can talk to them by phone, a little bit less than video, but better than nothing. Email, mail, the lowest level of impact of all of them. So you should use them. You absolutely should use all these technologies. You should also have a email messaging and a text messaging capability. You should also have a voicemail capability to where you have a telephone tree that calls and leaves messages, right? And none of that will be as effective as in person.
And Bill, if I was to add one more to that, which we're, I've heard at least in other denominations, which is the video message, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, email, text, but those short, whether they're 90-second, whether it's coming from, lay leadership or it's coming from clergy, everyone, even if it comes via an email, the Metropolitan obviously is a great example of that. And the video messages that he sends out, it's very easy. It's very compelling, right? To listen to the video messages, certainly easier for many than reading a longer email document. So I know that the Metropolitan's been very effective with his video messages.
Steve, you are so right. And that we now are starting to gather the metrics that prove the effectiveness of that as a communications platform. Now, there's some things you have to do. They have to be short. They have to be succinct. They have to be, the most important thing is they have to be user-friendly for your telephone. The vast majority of all video content is viewed on a phone, not on an iPad, not on a computer, on a phone. So when you're designing your website, when you're designing your email, when you're designing your video, don't release it until you've tested it on what it looks like on a phone, because it does look different. Some of these platforms don't work as effectively. So before I send out my Mailchimp email once a month, I check it out on multiple different platforms to see, is it going to look, is that image, is that graphic going to pop, is it going to get lost in the shuffle, et cetera, right? So, but video is the most impactful, most powerful. It's the reason why, as I gave you the stat in the beginning of the first program, 1 hour of video content is uploaded to YouTube every second of every day. And that was pre-COVID. It's a lot more now.
Yep. A few comments for those not monitoring the chat session. Kristen shared that we do use constant contact within the Metropolis. Father Corderis had reminded us that GOA, the Archdiocese Internet Ministry, also provides email listservs for free for our parishes if they'd like to use that. And can't help but sharing the Grand Master talked about a small group of fantasy football league with about 14 men and young men that really come together, and they've been going for 6 years strong. So I think that's a great example. One
Beautiful.
question to His Eminence regarding the small groups, and does His Eminence approve these 10 people in church events? And I'm assuming the question there, Mike, is just a gathering of 10 people, but whatever appropriate, inside, outside, is that people are comfortable with, and that local ordinances allow. Is that correct?
That's correct, Stephen. And also, don't forget the issues, the campuses. The parishes have campuses. We are mindful of those areas. While someone's home or backyard is something that the person needs to make the decision on that. Because of the local ordinances, they need to be mindful of that, and they go accordingly. So I don't see any difficulty on that. But on the parish campuses, we have to go to follow, like it happens now. Some of our parishes, they have liturgies outdoors with 10 or 12 people.
Right.
So we have that already according to the ordinances. So.
Yeah, and to His Eminence's point, we actually had one church, Your Eminence, wasn't in your metropolis, where again, consistent with the rulings of that metropolitan and that county, city, and state, they took the little field that they have like a soccer field on the premises, and they set out a circle of chairs properly distanced around each other, and they met out in the field, so,
Right. Right.
we just got to be smart about it. And again, the key there that, as Onan said, and Steve, you said it also, we have to do it in a loving and caring way that doesn't put any pressure on somebody, right? In other words, we don't want to create, that's one of the things we're going to cover in that October 7th podcast is, we've got to remember that our job is to love each other and to accept each other. And we don't know everybody's circumstances, and we don't know what their life experiences are and their comorbidities are and things of that nature. So before we should not sit in judgment ever, but before we sit in any judgment, we need to understand that we need to make sure that they're comfortable and love them for whatever they are and offer to help out any way we can.
Absolutely. But I think we all know now also, people that are comfortable that may not be at high risk, it is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful thing to come together with your fellow parishioners that we've been separated from for so long. And, we're blessed in my home parish to, now that the heat and the fires have dissipated, to be back with outdoor services. When I'm not there, I enjoy Sacramento and the many people that they do get up in Annunciation too. So it is just a beautiful feeling to see people that, we love and we've been separated from, at least physically.
Amen.
I think, and Margaret, thank you so much for correcting me on the Fantasy Football League. It sounds like you are the one woman on that, but hopefully you can get some other women to join you and, run the tables on the fantasy football small group there.
Margaret, you go, girl.
I think we've exhausted the questions. Does anyone else have any questions either to ask or in the chat? I know we've gone long. I know it's late for Bill, but we welcome him. Or please, come in a couple weeks when we have our next session. I'll put another plug in for Wednesday for Bill's next Stewardship Calling live broadcast. If you can make it, it'll be Wednesday, October 7th at 5 p.m. Pacific. So most of us are in Pacific. I know we've got Arizona and Hawaii here. But if you can do that, or certainly Bill, I know you pretty quickly post the recordings also. But
yeah, the podcast is usually up that night, or if not, the next morning. And again, the objective here, thank you, Steve, for bringing that up again, but the objective here is to give us a real life practical context for how we can change, all of us can change our lives now, today, and make it a more fulfilled and enriched life using the lessons learned from COVID-19 juxtaposed against some of the most amazing stories in history that come right from Holy Scripture, but they're speaking to us today. And this is a chance for us to be, if you look at history, Christianity grew more after times of crisis and pandemic than it did in other times, because people saw Christians acting differently and said, gosh, I'd like to be more like them. And so this is our time, and we just got to reconnect up with it. So thank you, Steve, for that.
Absolutely. Bill, any closing comments? And then
other than to thank every one of you for participating, thank you for everything you're doing for your metropolis, for your parishes, for your families, for your communities. And most importantly, as I always like to do, thank you for giving me the opportunity to offer whatever meager services or support I can offer you and encouragement I can offer you, so that one day you too will stand before the awesome judgment seat of Christ and say, Lord, I left it all on the field.
Your Eminence.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And Brother Bill, deep gratitude and respect to you for a very inspiring presence tonight and every time that we got together. My secret wish is to transport you from Atlanta here, but that will be a little bit short-sighted from my side. It's a blessing that we received no matter where you are. And every day, and we pray to God to give you health and inspiration, to give us always, and to keep us on focus on what we need to do at this point, especially now that our nation and our world is aching under many different challenges. This is the time for Christianity to show, as you said, what we're made of. And I want to express my sincere appreciations to everyone who came to this evening gathering and session, and looking forward to the next one. Let us pray so we can close. Christ our God, who are at all times in every hour in heaven and on earth, you are worshipped and glorified, who are long-suffering, merciful, and compassionate, who loves the just and shows mercy upon the sinner, who calls all to salvation through the promise of blessings to come. Lord, at this hour, receive our supplications and direct our lives according to your commandments. Sanctify our souls, hallow our bodies, correct our thoughts, cleanse our minds, deliver us from all tribulation, evil, and distress. Encompass us with the holy angels, that guided and guarded by them, we may attain to the unity of the faith and to the knowledge of your unapproachable glory. For you are blessed unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.
Many blessings to all of you. Thank you, Brother Bill. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kristen, and everyone. May God bless you all and keep you safe and healthy.
Thank you all. Have a good night. Stay well.
Καληνύχτα.